This is the story of James Leininger. In 1998, James Leininger was born in San Francisco, USA. Bruce and Andrea Leininger, James's parents, were a conservative evangelical couple that didn't believe in reincarnation. In fact, Bruce was very much against the idea of reincarnation. Not long after James was born, Bruce got a job in Louisiana, USA, and the Leiningers moved there. At 2 years old, James began having nightmares about World War II. While having nightmares, James said, "Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out." Kicking and clawing on the covers, James looked like he was trying to kick his way out of a coffin. His nightmare of being in an airplane crash continued 4 to 5 times a week. Concerned about their son, Andrea asked James who the man in the plane was, and Bruce asked James who shot down his plane. James told his parents that he was the man in the plane, and the Japanese were the ones that shot down his plane. James knew it was the Japanese who shot down his plane because he saw the big red sun. Bruce and Andrea were surprised by their son's knowledge of Japanese World War II aircraft. They didn't teach him this information, and there was no way of James learning that information by normal means. Curious to know more about James's nightmares, Bruce and Andrea asked their son if there were other people in his nightmares. James remembered a fellow pilot and friend named Jack Larson. Though James had an obsession with airplanes, he broke the propellers of his toy airplanes by crashing them into the coffee table. Surprisingly, James knew the fuel tank, which is attached to the bottom of a plane, was called a drop tank because it was ejected and dropped when there was no more fuel inside. However, his parents didn't teach him this, and they knew he didn't learn this from TV shows and books. As more time passed, James talked more about his past life. He told his parents that he flew a plane called the Corsair, and he said the Corsair took off from a boat called Natoma. According to him, the Corsair veered to the left on takeoff, and sometimes the tires on the plane blew when the plane landed. His knowledge of World War II didn't stop there. He told his parents that American pilots gave Japanese bombers girls' names and Japanese fighters boys' names. More specifically, he said the Americans called the bombers Bettys and the fighters Zeeks. Bruce researched his son's statements, and he was amazed when he learned his son was correct. Once, while watching a TV show about World War II, the narrator said the downed Japanese planes were Zeros. However, James knew the narrator was wrong. He told his parents that a downed Japanese plane was actually called a Tony. Then he explained to his parents that the Tony was a fighter that was smaller than a Zero. Bruce and Andrea researched their son's statements, and they learned their son was correct. While at the Lone Star Flight Museum, Bruce and Andrea watched their son walking around a Corsair conducting a flight check like a pilot normally does before boarding the aircraft they were about to fly. This surprised them. James wasn't even potty trained, but he seemed to be an expert on World War II aircraft. One day, Bruce bought a book about Pacific aircraft carriers, and he flipped through the pages of the book with James. When they got to the page about the Battle of Iwo Jima, James suddenly said that his plane shot down and crashed in that location. Bruce learned that a World War II aircraft carrier called the Natoma Bay supported the invasion of Iwo Jima. Remember, James said his airplane took off from a boat called Natoma. When James was little, he drew pictures of propeller planes and bombs exploding, and he signed his drawings James 3. Another thing James did for fun was play with G.I. Joe dolls. He named 3 of his dolls Billy, Leon, and Walter, but his parents didn't know anyone with these names, so they asked their son why he named his dolls Billy, Leon, and Walter. James responded, "Because that is who met me when I got to heaven." Though Bruce and Andrea were conservative Christians, their son's knowledge of World War II had them wondering whether their son experienced another life. Wanting to get answers, Bruce attended a Natoma Bay reunion in San Diego on September 11, 2002. At the reunion, Bruce learned that a man named James Huston Jr. died while he was serving in the Pacific. Huston Jr. was one of 18 aircraft carrier pilots from the Natoma Bay that died while serving in the Pacific, but he was the only one that died in the invasion of Battle of Iwo Jima. Remember, little James said he died in the Battle of Iwo Jima. What's more, he said he was the 3rd James, and he signed his drawings James 3. Could it be that James Leininger was a reincarnation of James Huston Jr.? If so, James Leininger would be the 3rd James because James Huston Jr. was the 2nd James and Huston's father was the 1st James. The surprises didn't end there. While at the reunion, Bruce learned that Billy, Leon, and Walter were Natoma Bay Navy aviators who died before Huston Jr. Remember, James named his dolls these names, and when asked why by his parents, James responded that he met these people when he was dead. But it's not just the names of these aviators that match with little James's dolls. Their hair colors of the aviators also match with the hair colors of James's dolls. Billy had dark hair, just like James's doll named Billy. Leon had blonde hair, just like James's doll named Leon. Walter had reddish hair, just like James's doll named Walter. While searching for more answers, Bruce learned that a man named Jack Larson was a pilot on the Natoma Bay. Remember, when James began having nightmares about an airplane crash, James said he had a pilot friend named Jack Larson. While talking with pilots who knew and saw Huston Jr., Bruce learned that Huston Jr.'s plane was shot down. Namely, Huston Jr.'s airplane propeller was destroyed in combat, therefore his plane went down. Remember, when James played with his toy planes, he destroyed the propellers on them by hitting them on the table, and James said he had nightmares of being in an airplane crash. Bruce spoke with Bob Greenwald, another pilot. According to Greenwald, Huston Jr. flew Corsairs for a period. Also, Greenwald said that the Corsair veered to the left on takeoff and blew tires when landing, just like little James said. One day, Bruce and his son met up with Natoma Bay veterans. James recognized Bob Greenwald by his voice. The Natoma Bay veterans stated that little James looked like James Huston Jr. However, little James said he was sad because everyone looked so old. He remembers how they looked like when they were young men.
They showed Leo the drawings.
He was right on the nose. I'm sure, in my mind, that he was there.
Leo invited James, now 3, to the reunion. James recognized several pilots, even called them by name.
You're Bob Greenwald. I'm serious.
And he'd never met Bob Greenwald?
No, he'd never met him before.
Andrea learned that one of James Huston Jr.'s sisters was alive. Ann Huston Barron, the sister of James Huston Jr., was 84 years old when Andrea contacted her. Andrea wanted her son to speak with Ann Barron, so they did. They spoke over the phone for a certain period. In his conversation with Ann, James Leininger made many correct statements about the life of James Huston Jr. Here are just 6 correct statements James Leininger made while he spoke with Ann. He said that Big James called her Annie. Ann knew that only her brother called her Annie. He said they had a sister named Ruth. He said that Annie was 4 years older than Big James, and Ruth was 4 years older than Annie. He said that their father was an alcoholic who broke things when he got drunk, but he said their father went to rehab for being an alcoholic. He said Ruth was a society columnist for a local paper, and he said Ruth was mortified when she had to write about a wealthy family that their mother, who was a maid, worked for. He said their mother hired an artist named Daryl to make portraits for Big James and Annie. Because James Leininger knew so much about James Huston Jr.'s life, Ann Barron believed that James Leininger was a reincarnation of her brother. Therefore, she sent several things that once belonged to James Huston Jr. to James Leininger.
James Huston's sister, Ann.
And he goes, it's not Ann, it's Annie. She wasn't my oldest sister. I had an older sister than that. And I said, you did? Who is that? And he goes, Ruth. I mean Ruth.
Eddie is what they called me when I was little. Knowing my name and my sister's name, things that my brother did when he was a kid. It's too amazing to describe how he would feel that way, but he does. He considers me his sister.
But does she consider James her brother?
I think it's probably a reincarnation of my brother.
Anne was so touched, she gave James items from her brother's final effects.
The little George Washington bust had been on my brother's desk all through school.
I said, where's the statue? He said, I put it on my desk.
Even though Bruce and Andrea are Christians, they believe their son is a reincarnation of James Huston Jr. There were many things James Leininger knew that could only be confirmed when Bruce went to a Natoma Bay reunion and when Annie spoke with James Leininger. Here are a few statements by Bruce Leininger and Andrea Leininger.
Do you ever rack your brain and say, gee, I hope I didn't say anything or do anything that put this in James' head? Do you ever question yourself still or no?
No, because we're talking to a 2-year-old. You know, I mean, what am I going to do? Sit him in a corner and say, listen, now we're going to concoct this elaborate scheme, and you're going to imagine that you went through those things.
I knew what he watched on television. I knew what stories I read to him. I'm a protective, first-time Southern mother. There was no other place he could have been getting this information.
What we did was we listened, and we followed the things that our son gave us. It became an adventure. It became an adventure, a discovery that went thousands of miles, talking to hundreds of people. and establishing facts beyond any reasonable doubt of proof that this is not a coincidence. This is indeed the past life experience of a child remembering the spirit and having the spirit of another person join this reality.
If you like spirituality, science, art, or animals, then be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and don't forget to turn on the notification bell.